we I just took a snippet of an entire Q&A that we did recently, and it was the question that you answered about what's the opposite of a value. And just to brush you up, if in case you don't remember that conversation or what you said, you made a reference to Donald Trump. Like, you could imagine an argument being, well, Donald Trump doesn't have value. If you think Trump's a bad guy, then you say, well, he doesn't have any values. And you said, well, that's not true. Just has a maybe a strange or different prioritization of his values. He values things like power and people loving him. So there's a comment on that video that I'd just love you to respond to. I think I sent it to you, but I'll read it out. It says, in ACT, that's a therapeutic model, we would say that achievement, affiliation, and power would be goals rather than values. Values are the qualities in which we engage in a freely chosen and purposeful way. They're not dictated by history and culture, but what radiates from our bones. They're not a concept or a construct, but purposeful directed behavior. I also think that there are core yearnings that are universal, like belonging, agency, sense of place in space, the yearning to feel, etc. The freely chosen values often serve as direction for fulfillment of those yearnings. So it wasn't a question, and it wasn't meant to be a question, just something be interesting to respond to.
Well, let me just, the question seems slightly confounded there. He doesn't believe that different cultures have different values. I mean, godly. I went to University of Pennsylvania, which had a famous anthropology department. People have been noting for centuries that different cultures value different things. What's important in one culture isn't important in another culture. I mean, Bruce Alexander talks about this. The Questioins Indians give things away as a way of indicating love and of gaining power. In America, we take things in, and that's how we gain power. In some culture, there's nothing worse than conflict. In other cultures, they're sort of famous for engaging in conflict. In some cases, some ethnic cultures are famous for squabbling. And in other cultures, and in some cultures, periodic fights to the death are the standard way of approaching things. So to ignore that culture influences values, to imagine, he's sort of describing motives almost biologically. I mean, one of the main arguments I've always made about addiction and drugs and alcohol, which I made I've made earlier around when we talked about free drinking, is how remarkably different styles of drinking are in different cultures. So you can't not notice it. If you go to Norway, public drunkenness they're very polite, nice people, but public drunkenness is a regular feature. There's a man I know who moved from Liverpool. He's Irish, Pat O'Hare. And he said, I've lived in Rome now for 20 years. I've never seen somebody drunk in public in Rome. So our friend probably may not get around that much, because you'll notice it's impossible to ignore differences in how people drink alcohol. In Ireland and London, you'll see people carousing late at night, young people going around drunk. So there are phenomenal differences in that. And there are phenomenal differences in motivations to do things. And that's why people encourage their children to achieve. Now, achievement is a giant, I would say, a motive is a desire to do something, to pursue a goal, a value you've been taught or learned. So I would say achievement motivation is a desire to achieve because you've developed the value of achievement and the goal of achieving things. And I think most parents operate on that basis. They encourage their children to be successful, particularly in school, in the milieu that you and I exist in, but to be successful in society. And they're pretty our friend doesn't get around much. I mean, when people write about the experience, that whole book, who's the guy we've talked about? Okie Heaven. What's the title of it?
Not Hillbilly Elegy.
Hillbilly Heaven.
J.D. Vance. Yeah.
Is that what it's called? Hillbilly Heaven?
Hillbilly Elegy.
Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah.
So he was brought up in that cult, but he went to like Yale Law School. But he came from a culture. His mother was on drugs, and his grandmother was violent, and his mother was institutionalized. And then his grandmother raised him. That's what the movie's about. And suddenly she changed her values. And the story, here's an example. He resents hillbillies at the same time that I don't know if you can say he's one of them or isn't, and he loves them. And he talked about how he would get a job after school working at a place, and a guy who had a child whose girlfriend was pregnant wouldn't come in for work some days when he didn't feel like it, but he had a cell phone, which the hillbillyology guy could only dream about, because that guy was getting support payments for a child from the state. So hillbillyology is a war of values within one human being who developed a high level of achievement in a culture where all around him he saw people who couldn't put it together to get what they wanted by working and accomplishing things. So there are worlds apart in achievement. You and I grew up in worlds and raised our children, and all of my children graduated college. That's not biological. That's not an accident.
Which I think like the first sentence is, it seems like the whole thing he's trying to say that values are the direction that we take our yearnings, but then also that line that's confusing is they're not dictated by history, culture, but what radiates from our bones. So I don't know.
So I'll just close. I mean, I actually, one of my early heroes when I was in college, a man named David McClellan, wrote a book called The Achieving Society. And McClellan had developed, there's a list of motivations that people talk about. And the chief motivations they usually talk about are achievement and affiliation and power. And people differ in these different motivations, and they have ways of measuring that. When I got to graduate school, McClellan developed the achievement motive, that's a book, with a man named John Atkinson, and I actually had John Atkinson teach, I had his course for motivation. So I know something about it. And McClellan is a guy who went from the laboratory to high flying. Some people don't like that. He became head of the Department of Social Relations at Harvard. He was at the top of the pinnacle. And what he did was he measured, why do certain societies grow economically and others don't? And societies change over time in that. Scotland eventually became a kind of an impoverished relative of England. It's now resurgent. And at one point, Scotland was the hotbed of the Industrial Revolution. And so McClellan measured values in childhood storybooks. And then he measured economic growth in that culture 20 or 30 years or in the next generation in relationship. And McClellan showed that the more achievement motivation, which was setting out to accomplish tasks in a moderate size level and succeeding at that, was related to the economic growth level in that same culture, in that same society some decades later. So, and one last thing about achievement motivation, which is related to addiction. Do you think high achievers take great risks, moderate risks, or no risks?
High achievers have to take great risks, but they are
moderate. The high achievement was motivated by taking moderate risks.
Well, see so okay, but I'm seeing it as like,
the example that you would use is if a kid is presented with a task, there are ways that you take the easiest version of that task so it's no challenge, or you take such a great, like throwing a ball into a hoop, that you can't make it, and the sting is removed from failure. High achievement is selecting moderate goals, achievable goals that you can take a step-by-step process towards. So you can see I'm an achievement motivation fan. I don't know. You could look at me and you might say, Stan, you've taken an awful lot of great risks in your life, and maybe that was part of your answer, and Elon Musk is going to the moon or whatever the hell he's doing.
We'll see that. But I think so. If Elon Musk is taking it, is making a series of moderate risks relative to himself. It's just that another person could imagine that some of the risks that he's taking are, if he fails at them, it's such a big fall. But he's built himself up so that it's moderate. So yeah, I totally buy into that. Yeah,
going to the moon and creating electric cars.
Huge goals, weighed risks.
Build a factory and pay people and get
right.
So, and that you can see that's the opposite to some extent of addiction. If somebody doesn't want to take any risks at all, which is getting back to hillbilly elegy, where the guy's buying a cell phone, but he's not actually working, or you're somebody who has such grandiose goals that you never actually do anything, you sit around and fantasize. That sounds like that almost sounds like a drug experience.
Yeah.
So, my little claim to fame in life, in my memoir, all three of my kids are high achievers. I marvel sometimes at what high achievers they are. They all strive to do the best job they can. All of them are slightly impatient with other people who don't share their aspirations and goals. I think it's funny to hear stories like that. My daughter Anna, when she worked at Esquire, she was in charge of the interns who don't get any money. She was once an intern, and you don't get any money for that. So, okay. And one day an intern didn't do his job, and she spoke to him, and he said, "Oh, I had to go to the dentist." And Anna was incredulous. "You mean you didn't call me and tell me you were able to do that?" And I'm wondering, getting back to the person who asked this, how did Anna learn that's not how it's done?
Mm-hmm.
It's because, we just expected them, demanded maybe too harsh a word. And obviously, if you push too hard, you get people who have a totally negative reaction, and they just go off in an opposite direction. For better or for worse, and there was a mother involved in this, with three different children, all have different personalities. All of them learn the idea of the need to have set goals, have high goals, and to do moderate tasks to achieve them. And they are better achievers than me. Getting back to my goal is to change the way the world. The title of my memoir is A Scientific Life on the Edge, My Lonely Quest to Change How We See Addiction. And, you and I spoke on another podcast. That's an impossible goal. We're not going to change how people see addiction. So I didn't pick a moderate goal there, which gets back to your saying, well, some high achievement involves picking a goal that's impossible to attain.
Yeah. All right. Good answer. We'll see what he says to that too. I'm interested to see maybe where he was coming from. Our friend from Nepal asked another question. He wants to know, I love just like fundamental questions like this. He wants to know, how do you think people should define recovery, one? And what, I guess basically saying here, what's the big deal about relapse? So is relapse such a big deal? What are your thoughts on it, I guess?
Well, how would we define recovery? I'm going to throw that one back to you. How would we define recovery?
Well, if you think about recovery not as something that you build as the essence of your life, like I'm not a person who recovered from heroin. I'm a lot more than that. It's like the addiction was going off the road and recovery is getting back on the road. And so Stamps' definition is pretty good. I think we follow that pretty closely. What is it?
Home and dealing with this addiction is not a thing that happens to you.
Right.
Recovery is not a thing that happens to you either. It's an ongoing process.
Right.
And addiction's an ongoing process. So you and I would define, and when we were, we don't label people as addicted, and we don't label people as being in recovery. we assist people to get to a better place in their life where they're more successfully accomplishing goals and dealing with situations so that they're more comfortable and successful in life, with people, with work, with their feelings about themselves. It's an ongoing self-defined process. It's not a thing. Recovery, being in recovery and being addicted as things, as end states, is a misunderstanding of what human beings are all about, and about how you achieve the goals that are packed into recovery.
Addicted's getting off track, and recovery means regaining traction in a
Right.
holistic way.
I'm glad you pointed out that I don't know that I specifically made that connection before. Yeah, it's not a thing, just the same way that we say addiction's not a thing. There was another part of the question. So how do we define recovery? Yeah, it's an ongoing, self-sustaining process of moving your life in a positive direction.
And what he's saying, the second part is it really so important to make relapse a big issue, especially for people who follow abstinence?
Well, we do something called relapse prevention, and we have a track that people are going along, and we say you can get off at any station. And people, of course, AA defines relapse as having a sip of beer. And we say that that's dangerous, apropos of another discussion you and I have had about focusing, and we agree with it, focusing solely on abstinence. So you shouldn't have had, maybe you didn't want to have a beer, maybe you can have the beer. Then you keep drinking, okay. That might not be your ideal solution either. Then maybe you get drunk and you get in your car. Now we're getting into dangerous territory, and you drive and you get in an accident, or you get arrested and you lose your license. And then, so those are all stages. All of those things could be called relapse and are called relapse. We're getting back into the life process program. And then there's a final stage. And the final stage would be if you had had a severe drug or alcohol problem, and you did what we just described with alcohol or with the drug, and then you relapse completely back into your former state of intensive addiction. That's bad. That seems to justify the term relapse. Everything else is a stage in a process that could be, for want of a better word, recovered from. You can go back to whatever your train stop is. Well, I'm not going to drink it all. I'm only going to have a couple of beers. Maybe I'll even get drunk once in a while, but I'll do it under safe circumstances. I'll never do anything endangering to my legal or life situation if I ever get drunk. And, you know, we don't throw people off the train if they get drunk again. But we do have as an ultimate goal, of course, relapsing where a person falls completely back into that pit where they had originally consulted us to escape.
So you could imagine a person, actually I work with a person like this right now who abstains from alcohol, and the reason that he abstains from alcohol is because it's degenerative to his health. I mean, it's just, so he doesn't, if he has a sip of wine again, believe that he's fallen off and his life is falling apart. He says, Jesus, why did I do that? Because I know it's bad for me. I shouldn't have done that. So that's how he uses the life process program to talk that through and figure out what was it about that night that I really wanted to drink, even though I'm trying to be careful about my health. That's a pretty good framework. Your life doesn't fall completely apart because you do a drug or you do something that you've been trying to quit doing. You can make a rational choice about how you might do it again next time.
And his reason for not drinking was the specific health one. In an earlier podcast, you and I discussed my old friend Altan, who stopped drinking, who loved wine. And, you know, she's 92. Somewhere along the line, wine stopped agreeing with her. You know, in that case, relapse is like any drinking at all. And in the same way, our road to recovery as well, we understand your goal. It's clear cut. You feel, and your doctor feels, it's the best way to proceed in life, not to drink at all. If that's your goal, let's go back to that train stop. You know, no regrets. You shouldn't have done that, but, you know, I have my brother died, and my sister-in-law developed late life breast cancer, and of all things, she was a Mormon, so her whole family was atheists, but she developed a love for wine. And she went to her oncologist, and drinking makes people live longer. That's a whole other topic, but it is a risk factor for breast cancer. My sister-in-law is now in her 80s, and her oncologist said, well, you can have a glass of wine at night. And I didn't talk to the oncologist, but I'm just sitting there thinking what he's thinking. He's thinking, the lady's 80, she had acquired breast cancer. This is an important part of her life. It's an important part of her health, and of sleeping at night, a ritual that she performs. Okay. Sometimes it gets back to another theme I have. Common sense health providers, and I believe a ton of doctors are like this, make more sense than addiction specialists often.
For sure. The answer to this question could easily be see previous question, but let me read it out and see if there's something specific you want to address about it. This person says, in AA, they say that if you start drinking again after being abstinent for many years, you end up back as if you had been drinking all along if you take that drink. If you've grown as a person and have many interests, can you have a social drink, or is it worth risking everything that you have gained? How can you ever know if that social drink is attainable? That's that last part is the interesting bit. How can you know if that social drink is attainable?
How would you answer that person?
It's tough without asking him questions, but
right. In a way, playing answer man is cheating, because we don't do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would be interested. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're not about, but I would be interested to know what the belief system is around the drink not being attainable in the first place. And if that's a belief, how confident is that belief, and why, and what things about life and prior knowledge and values and environment make that person believe it. And so I might, epistemically speaking, I might figure what in life would make you feel more confident that you could have a drink socially than less. And I think just getting someone to talk that out might be a way to read.
You're getting to where I would go. I mean, he's sort of asking if he can drink again.
Right.
That's
I kind of want to drink. Can I?
Right. Yeah. And we're saying, well, we're not actually going to answer that question. But, what do you feel would make you more comfortable about being able to drink? You sound as though you feel you're like in a totally different place. What makes you feel that? And then we would say, you are allowed to make your own life decisions, and you could try it and be tuned in and mindful. And you could use me as one checkpoint about how that's going for you. So, it's a process. It's not one to be afraid of. It's a normal process. And plenty of people have done it. We're not guaranteeing that you can do it. If you feel this is motivated behavior, we can go along with that. But getting back that message, we're getting back to cultural messages. Telling a person who has successfully abstained for 3 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, that they've done nothing, that the first drink they have gets you back, which is how they work it. They tell me in AA, they give you're back to day one. It's the opposite of achievement motivation, for one thing, by the way. It's a failure to recognize all of the power and success the person has exerted for months or years. And we would do the opposite. We would say, oh gosh, you haven't had a drink for 6 months or a year or 2 years. How have you been able to do that? You've certainly gotten better control of your life. Tell me how you've done that. And, wherever we're going from this point on, we want to harness all of the strength that you've shown to this day. Why would even denying that a person was addicted is certainly not what we would ever do.
Mm-hmm.
But denying that a person has been, by even the AA definition, in recovery, denying all of that value is the opposite of how we approach people and clinical work.
There's a statement. I think there's someone just chiming in. So not a question, but we can respond to or just let it kind of simmer and resonate. This lady says, I recall attending an AA meeting with an ex-boyfriend 25 years ago when I was allowed to sit in and I listened. And the head person stated to the audience, if you drink 1 beer a year, you're an alcoholic. And for some reason, that really shocked me. He stayed with me for many years and stayed with me for many years. I believe he was speaking to the recovering alcoholics that were there, not everyone in general, but still, I feel like it was a radical stance.
Well, you know, a theme that's run through all of the things that we've been talking about are cultural attitudes towards alcohol and drugs as evil, good, or somewhere in between in a part of your life. I mean, there is a whole theme in the temperance movement. It's called the fatal glass of beer, where you have that 1 glass of beer and that sets you off to a whole ruination of life. That's a strong theme in America. And we're about unlearning that theme. So, you know, the woman, when she says she's shocked, I guess she's saying, huh? That doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't, and it also emphasizes the link between temperance and recovery. She doesn't make it clear that presumably the leader is saying, well, if you have a beer and you were previously alcoholic, then that's alcoholism. That's their story, which we don't believe, obviously. I don't think he's saying any human being who has a beer is an alcoholic, but you know, those are related. Cultural and recovery concepts are very closely linked.
Well, it's cool that all the questions sort of linked with what you were saying in our previous interview about Zach Galifianakis. So it was a good time spent.
From one to the other.
All right. Well, thank you, Stanton. We'll wrap it up here and say thanks to people for asking questions. And just for folks to remember that if you want to ask any questions anytime, just email. We'll have the email in the show notes, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and we'll talk to you next time.